네, 시청자 여러분 안녕하십니까? 연합뉴스 경제TV의 신동준입니다. 오늘은 가을을 맞이해서 이곳 북촌에서 좀 특별한 손님을 맞고 2025년 경제 전망에 대해서 들어보는 시간을 좀 가지려고 합니다. 오늘 이 시간 함께 하실 분은요, 시카고 상업거래소죠. CME의 수석 이코노미스트이신 에릭 놀랜드 전무님이십니다. 안녕하세요. 네, 귀한 시간 내주셔서 감사합니다.
Hi, yes, I'm Eric Norland, Chief Economist with CME Group. I'm based in London, England, and my role at CME Group is to follow basically all of the different markets that trade on the exchange, including financial instruments like currencies, bonds, and equity index futures, as well as commodities such as metals, agricultural goods, and energy.
네, 또한 이 자리에는 에릭 놀랜드 전무님의 인사이트를 듣고 공부하기 위해서 제가 가르치고 있는 숭실대학교 금융경제학과 학생들이 자리를 함께 했습니다. 인사해 주시겠어요? 안녕하세요. 시작하기에 앞서서 에릭 전무님께서는 매년 이맘때쯤에 한국을 방문해서 일주일 동안 이 아이돌 같은 바쁜 일정을 소화한다고 들었습니다. 혹시 매년 방문하시면 한국에 대한 느낌이 그때마다 좀 어떠신지, 그리고 전무님을 기다리는 투자자들도 굉장히 많은데요. 소감 한 말씀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Well, first of all, I love coming to Korea. I've been here many times. I was trying to count how many times it's been. I believe this is my 9th trip to Korea. And I've always enjoyed coming here. I've been here at all times of the year, but I think the fall is especially beautiful, especially October and November. The weather is beautiful, and of course the food and the people are always wonderful.
네, 이제 본격적으로 좀 전망을 여쭙겠습니다. 일단 연준 이야기부터 좀 여쭤보고 싶은데요. 연합뉴스 경제TV에서도 매번 FOMC 생중계를 할 정도로 한국 투자자들도 연준의 이 움직임이나 이 코멘트에 대해서 굉장히 관심이 많습니다. 현재 그 페드 선물 시장이나 파생 상품 시장에 연준의 기준금리 인하가 어느 정도 반영되어 있는지 좀 듣고 싶고요. CME에서 그 데이터를 많이 제공하시니까요. 그리고 어느 정도 반영하는 것이 또 적절하다고 생각하시는지 그 생각을 좀 말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
Yeah, so first of all, the Federal Reserve, as you know, cut interest rates 50 basis points last month. The market going into that decision wasn't sure what they were going to do. If they were going to cut 25 or 50, they opted for the larger of the two possibilities. And the market continues to expect that the Federal Reserve will probably cut interest rates perhaps 6 more times over the next 12 months, perhaps taking off 150 additional basis points off of interest rates. However, it is important to realize that those are expectations built into the Fed funds futures curve, and those expectations can change very rapidly.
연준이 인플레이션에 대한 안정을 어느 정도 확신하면서 드디어 이제 고용시장 방어를 위해서 기준금리 인하를 시작했습니다. 근데 인플레이션이 좀 걱정인데요. 대선 불확실성 때문에 이제 미리 투자라든가 이런 부분들을 좀 밀어놓은 기업들이 좀 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 11월 대선 이후에 미국의 건설 붐이나 투자가 다시 살아나면 혹시 인플레이션이 다시 또 압력이 높아질 수 있는 걱정은 없는지 이 부분에 대해서 좀 궁금하고요. 또 인플레이션에 대해서 우리가 추가로 시장은 중요하게 생각하지 혹시 않더라도 더 중요하게 봐야 되는 데이터들이 있는지, 혹시 체크할 것이 있는지 인플레이션 전망하고 같이 묶어서 말씀해 주시면 좋겠습니다.
Yeah, so when it comes to inflation, it's a very interesting point. You know, the bond market in the United States has its own estimate of inflation that comes from the difference between standard US Treasuries and what are called TIPS, or Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. And the bond market currently is pricing that inflation will average 2% per year over the next 5 to 10 years, which in some ways is quite surprising given that last Friday's inflation number actually increased from 3.2 to 3.3%. I think that there is a very significant risk that we are in a generally higher and less stable inflation environment than we were before the pandemic. As a result of increased geopolitical tensions, a global turn towards protectionism, and rising geopolitical risks, including the risks that we've seen coming up recently in the Middle East and between Russia and Ukraine.
현재 그 미국의 중립금리에 대한 질문입니다. 중립금리는 인플레이션이나 디플레이션을 발생하지 않는 안정적인 균형금리의 개념인데요. 이 중립금리를 어느 정도로 추정하고 계신지 좀 궁금하고요. 그리고 또 이 시장은 물론이고 이 학계는 또 중립금리를 어느 정도 추정하고 있는지 말씀을 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yeah, so estimating the neutral rate at which it would neither cause inflation to accelerate nor decelerate is a very difficult thing to do. Truthfully, I don't think anybody really knows where the neutral rate is. But if I had to estimate it, I would estimate it to be around the level of core inflation. Before the pandemic, in a decade before the pandemic, inflation was averaging around 2% per year. And the Federal Reserve, by the end of that economic expansion in 2017, 2018, 2019, was able to bring its policy range into a range of about 1 5/8 to 2 3/8%, which was near the level of core inflation. So at the moment, the level of core inflation is about 3.3%. So if I had to take a guess as to where the neutral rate is, I think I would put it around 3.25%.
이제 고용 시장에 대한 이야기를 좀 들어보겠습니다. 미국의 기업 조사에서는 작년 12월 이후에 이제 일자리가 170만 개 정도 늘어난 걸로 나타났는데요. 근데 가계 조사에서는 웬일인지 일자리가 거의 늘지 않은 것으로 조사가 되었습니다. 이게 차이가 생기는 이유가 뭔지, 그리고 어떤 조사가 좀 더 우리가 신뢰해야 되는 것인지를 좀 말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. We have essentially two entirely separate surveys of the labor market in the United States. One is called the Establishment Survey. It's where we get non-farm payrolls, average hourly earnings, and the number of hours worked. And it's been showing very robust job growth of nearly 2 million jobs during the past 12 months. That survey is a survey primarily of large corporations. And large corporations in the US, generally speaking, are doing quite well. They're very profitable. Many of them have a lot of cash. That cash is earning 5% per year, simply being invested in T-bills or other short-term securities. And many of them also issued bonds during the pandemic when bond yields were low that allowed them to lock in long-term financing. So these companies are doing well and they continue to hire. By contrast, there's also the household survey, which is where we get the labor force participation rate as well as the unemployment rate. And this survey has shown actually fairly stagnant job creation over the last year and rising unemployment over the last year and a half. So the difference, I think, is that the household survey is doing a better job of capturing what's happening at small and mid-sized enterprises. And small and mid-sized enterprises don't borrow from bondholders, they borrow from banks. The average duration of those loans is about 2 years, and they have seen a tremendous increase in their cost of financing as a result of the Fed raising rates by over 500 basis points. And so it seems to me that many of these companies are now shedding staff, making very difficult decisions to maybe delay or cancel expansion plans. And that overall, the household survey does a more comprehensive and broadly more accurate job of what's happening in the US labor market. And it's not really as strong as many people think it is.
팬데믹 이후에 미국 고용 시장이 뭔가 많이 달라진 것 같습니다. 말씀 듣고 보니까 더 그런데요. 이 고용 시장의 데이터들은 좀 불안정한데 이 해고율이 굉장히 낮거든요. 이직률도 팬데믹 이전 수준보다 훨씬 낮게 유지가 되고 있고요. 그래서 일반적인 경우랑 많이 다른 것 같아서 특히 해고율이 낮은 이유를 어떻게 보고 계시는지 좀 궁금하고요. 에릭 전무님이 혹시 피부로 느끼시는 이 고용 시장의 느낌이 좀 있으신지 말씀해 주실 게 있으신지 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yeah, so those are both very good questions. It is true that the layoff rate is fairly low. There's multiple ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it is to look at the initial and continuing jobless claims. Those numbers have been exceptionally low. That may be distorted, however, because during the pandemic, many Americans claimed unemployment insurance because they were laid off in 2020 and 2021. And there are time limits on people receiving the benefits a second time if they've received it previously in recent years. So those numbers may be artificially low and the layoff rate may be a little bit higher than what people suppose. And again, I think when the government numbers and other organizations measure layoffs, they're measuring layoffs primarily coming from big companies, and maybe missing some of the financial distress happening at smaller and mid-sized enterprises that may indeed be shedding staff at the moment.
이제 궁금한 것들이 좀 풀렸는데요. 그렇다면 이제 종합해서 향후 고용 시장을 어떻게 전망하고 계신지 좀 말씀해 주시고요. 그 고용 시장에 따라서 연준의 기준금리 인하에 대한 속도, 그리고 뭐 달러 가치에 대한 영향 이런 것들을 좀 종합해서 말씀해 주시면 좋겠습니다.
So this is one of the great debates in economics in the United States at the moment is what is going to happen to the labor market going forward and what is going to happen to the US economy more generally. And so there are basically two schools of thought. One school of thought is that we're going to have a soft landing, in which case employment growth will slow, but it will remain positive. And the argument for this is that we appear to be having a soft landing already at the moment, and that federal spending remains very generous with a large budget deficit, which could continue to drive the economy forward, and that consumers still have a fair amount of savings that they could use, they could continue to spend, and that corporate profits and businesses are still in very, very strong shape, which could continue to drive investment spending and labor market growth. There is, however, another school of thought, which is the one that I consider myself to belong to more so, that the Federal Reserve has perhaps over-tightened policy. They have raised interest rates too much. They have left them high for too long, and that there are very long lag times between when the central bank moves rates and when the eventual consequences of those rate hikes become felt in the economy. And I estimate the lag time for monetary policy to be around 2 to maybe even 2.5 years. So from this viewpoint, we have not even really felt the full consequences of the Fed's rate tightening cycle, which only ended in July last year. And they kept rates at an extremely high level until just a few weeks ago. And even after a 50 basis point cut, interest rates are still very high compared to where they have been in recent years. So my fear is that we could see an economic downturn in the US in 2025 or 2026 that could potentially push the unemployment rate significantly higher.
고용 시장에 대한 내용은 이 정도로 마무리를 하고요. 다음 질문을 좀 드리겠습니다. 인공지능에 관한 질문인데요. AI에 대한 무용론이 한창 있었습니다. 이코노미스트시니까 이코노미스트가 바라보는 그 AI 시장에 대한 생각이 좀 궁금하고요. 특히 이 LLM, 거대 언어 모형을 통해서 저는 이제 지능의 가격이 낮아졌다고 생각하거든요. 그러면 이제 생산성을 좀 높일 거라는 기대가 있습니다. 경제학계에서도 의견이 좀 분분해서 전무님께서는 어떤 의견을 가지고 계신지 좀 궁금하고요. 또 전무님의 업무를 하시는 동안 혹은 주변에서 AI가 생산성을 향상시키거나 생산성을 좀 바꿀 수 있는 영향을 줬던 에피소드가 있으면 좀 소개해 주시면 좋겠습니다.
Yeah, so this is a great question, and I think it's still very much an open debate. I think there's no question that artificial intelligence has reached a sort of revolutionary state where you can begin to interact with it much more like a human being than was ever the case in the past. And it is very impressive to me how quickly some of the AIs are able to organize information and analyze data. And so I tend to think that AI will lead to a productivity revolution. There is still some debate. The first wave of the internet in the 1990s and early 2000s boosted productivity growth worldwide. And that lasted until just about the global financial crisis. The second wave of the internet, which involved mainly social media, appeared, if anything, to lower productivity, or at least not to add to productivity very much. We had much slower growth in much of the world during the past decade. So there are still some people who wonder maybe if AI will be more like social media, which we tend to spend a lot of time on, but doesn't really seem to add much economic value, rather than something that truly enhances productivity. But whether or not AI is disinflationary is another matter. Because the truth is, even if AI raises productivity, it also consumes enormous amount of electricity and is requiring large investments in new data centers, which involves a lot of natural resources, including copper, which needs to be used to wire all of these different installations. And just to give you one example, in the United States, they're thinking about reactivating the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, which famously came to a near meltdown in the mid-1970s in order to power an AI data center. So these are the kinds of choices that people are going to be looking at as these technologies become more pervasive.
제가 전 직장에서 리서치 센터장을 했었습니다만 제 첫 업무는 채권 애널리스트였습니다. 그래서 채권 관련된 질문을 좀 드리고 싶은데요. 과거에는 일드 커브가 역전된 다음에 한 1년에서 2년 정도 시차를 두고 경제가 침체에 빠졌었는데요. 지금은 벌써 2년 정도가 지났는데도 침체를 전망하는 기관은 뭐 거의 없는 것 같습니다. 일드 커브가 역전되었음에도 불구하고 이렇게 경기 침체가 오지 않는 이유, 아까 2025년 6년 정도의 침체를 예상한다고는 하셨습니다만 지금까지 이렇게 견조하게 시장이 가게 되는 이유는 무엇이라고 생각하시는지 좀 궁금합니다.
Yeah, I think a long time ago, back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when the yield curve would invert, we would very often have a recession within 6 to 12 months. So the monetary transmission mechanism at the time was very, very short. And when the Fed would move policy, the economy would respond very quickly. But during the 1980s, there was a lot of financial innovation, including the creation of the mortgage bond market in the United States, as well as the high-yield corporate bond market, and pushing people into longer-term fixed-rate loans. And so by my estimate, looking at the GDP data from the mid-1980s forward and looking at yield curve data, the lag time between a yield curve inversion and a recession over the last, say, 35 years or so has grown to be around 2 to 2.5 years. So when the central bank moves policy, it does eventually impact the economy. It just takes a long time to work through the system. So for example, in the United States, almost all homeowners are on 15 or 30-year fixed-rate mortgages. Many large corporations borrow money in the bond market. The investment-grade companies usually for around 7 to 10 years at a time. So it's really small businesses, businesses with who issue debt in the high-yield market, as well as credit card holders who are more influenced by short-term interest rate movements. And already over the last few months, we have seen a tremendous increase in the number of delinquencies on credit card loans, which are now to their highest level since early 2011. A sharp increase in delinquencies on auto loans, which have risen to their highest level since 2010. And we're also starting to see a slight increase in the mortgage default rate as well. All of which, to my mind, are sending us signals that there is some degree of financial stress among American households as a result of the higher interest rates.
네, 다음 질문을 이어가겠습니다. 정부가 이 재정 적자 문제도 해결이 만만치 않은 것 같습니다. 이 국채 발행을 구조적으로 늘린다는 측면에서 이 장기 금리를 추세적으로 상승시킬 위험이 꽤 높다고 생각되는데요. 지금 이런 구조가 지속 가능할까요? 그리고 만약에 해결된다면 어떤 형태로 진행이 될지 궁금합니다.
Yeah, so this is a very good point. So in the United States at the moment, the federal budget deficit is 5.5% of GDP, which is very high at any time of the economic cycle. But I think it's particularly alarming when we have unemployment at 4%. It's kind of normal to have a big budget deficit if you're in a recession or unemployment's already risen to high levels. But to have such a large deficit with low unemployment is quite alarming, I think. The Congressional Budget Office projects that the U.S. debt level, the federal government's debt level, will rise from around 100% of GDP to maybe as high as 160% of GDP over the next decade if nobody does anything about this. And by doing anything about this, I mean one of two things, either cutting spending or raising taxes. But when you look at the presidential election that's occurring at the moment, neither candidate has a plan to reduce deficits. And in fact, quite the contrary, both candidates have a plan to expand deficits further. So I don't really see any political resolution to this on the horizon. And it seems to me that the U.S. is likely, at least in the near term, to continue to see expanding budget deficits and, and rising debt relative to the size of GDP. The question in my mind is, when does the bond market come to some sort of realization about this and perhaps start charging the U.S. government much, much higher yields for borrowing money?
CME에서 오셨으니까 그 일드 커브와 함께 내재 변동성, 즉 빅스 얘기를 좀 여쭤보겠습니다. 이 경기 사이클에 따라서 주식시장의 빅스하고 일드 커브의 관계가 이제 계속 달라지는 것으로 알고 있는데요. 지금은 어떤 국면에 있는지, 그리고 현재 그 상황이 시사하는 바가 무엇인지를 좀 설명해 주시죠.
Yes, so since the early 1990s, there seems to be a cyclical relationship between the level of implied volatility in the equity market, as well as other markets on which there are options, and the shape of the yield curve. And so essentially it's a four-part cycle. Usually during a recession, you have a very flat or even inverted yield curve at the beginning of the recession, and you usually have very high levels of market volatility. Then as a recession happens, the central bank will cut interest rates, which will steepen the yield curve. And so for a while in the early stages of a recovery, you'll have a steep yield curve, but you'll still have a very high level of both implied and realized market volatility. But then as the central bank eases monetary policy, that tends to inject money into both the economy and into financial markets. So the economy begins growing again. And as investment or as capital gets injected back into the financial markets, it becomes easy for buyers to find sellers and sellers to find buyers. So somebody can often execute a large trade in the market, and there'll be somebody to take the other side at a nearby price. So volatility begins to decline. So usually by the mid stage of an economic cycle, you now have low volatility and still a very steep yield curve stemming from the easy monetary policy. So at this point, the central bank usually concludes that, okay, we need to now turn our attention to preventing inflation. So they raise interest rates, which flattens the yield curve. And then sometimes in the late stages of an economic expansion, you have a very flat or inverted yield curve, but markets are still very calm. And the problem with this scenario, which by the way is more or less where we are today, is that the central banks are draining liquidity from the market. And at some point, somebody will attempt to execute a large trade in the market, and they will find that there is nobody there at a nearby price. And so prices have to start moving in order to fill that trade, which can then knock people out of other positions in options markets or futures markets, sometimes very heavily concentrated positions like we saw against the Japanese yen a few months ago. And you can wind up with an explosion of volatility that pushes you towards a more recessionary environment. And that is the kind of scenario that I fear might happen at some point in the next year or two.
투자랑 관련된 몇 가지 좀 질문을 드려보겠습니다. 최근에 이 중국에 대한 관심이 갑자기 높아졌습니다. 이 중국이 대규모 경기와 증시 부양책을 발표하면서 이 주가가 큰 폭으로 상승했는데요. 이 정책들은 성공할 수 있을까요? 그리고 이 중국이 원자재 시장하고도 관련이 많이 있는데 혹시 관련해서 짚어줄 포인트가 있으시면 좀 짚어주시기 바랍니다.
Yes, so I think that there are two key questions here. The first question is the stimulus package in China big enough to boost their economy? And the second is, how will the economy respond given the levels of debt? So first, when you look at the size of the stimulus package, the numbers do seem very large at first blush. So for example, they are essentially giving a $2.3 trillion bailout to their local governments in China, which have been financing themselves based on land sales. They're also doing a 1 trillion won essentially bond issuance from the local authorities to allow them to consolidate the debt of quasi-public corporations involved in real estate development. And there's also a $1 trillion yuan essentially recapitalization of the nation's largest banks. So all in all, this seems to come to a lot of money, 4.3 trillion yuan. The problem is when you add up all of these numbers, it comes to 3.6% of GDP, which is not particularly large. In addition to that, the central bank has been cutting interest rates, but the difference between their interest rates and core inflation has actually been fairly stable. Their interest rates have been falling, but core inflation has also been falling. So the real rate of interest has actually been staying just about unchanged. And so I think there are real questions as to whether or not the stimulus package, as it has been proposed thus far, is large enough to stimulate the Chinese economy. The second question relates to their level of debt. Now, China has very successfully stimulated its economy in the past. For example, in 2009, China did a massive stimulus. It was roughly 10 times bigger with respect to GDP than what they did recently. However, at that time, the total public and private sector debt of China added up to only 140% of GDP. Now that debt level has risen to close to 300% of GDP. And so when debt levels are low and the government does a stimulus, it very quickly adds to GDP through both the investment and spending components of GDP. By contrast, when debt levels are very high, often additional borrowing simply serves to finance the existing stock of debt rather than to adding to the economy. And indeed, when you look at what has been proposed, mostly it involves shifting debt from point A to point B rather than actually growing the economy further. So I'm a little skeptical that this is going to boost the economy, but it may prevent it from deteriorating further.
구리는 그 다양한 산업에서 이 필수적인 원자재로 사용되면서 이 닥터 카퍼라는 별명을 갖고 있는데요. 이제 경제 선행지표 역할을 하는 거죠. 하반기 이후에 S&P 500 지수와 반대로 주가는 잘 올라가고 있는데 이 구리 가격은 좀 거꾸로 하락하고 있는 것 같거든요. 이 구리 가격이 하락하는 것이 시사하는 바가 무엇인지에 대해서 좀 말씀해 주십시오.
Yeah, so that's a difficult question. Copper, you're right, over many decades has earned its reputation as Dr. Copper, a sort of indicator of at least the health of the industrial economy and the health often of the housing market around the world, since housing and wiring required to, connect a house to the electric grid has been one of the main uses for copper. In recent years, however, copper has begun to diverge from other industrial metals. So in recent years, copper prices have risen a great deal relative to the prices of aluminum, iron ore, steel, and other industrial metals. And part of this, I think, is unique to copper for two reasons. First, copper is the primary beneficiary of the energy transition, the shift away from combustion engines towards electric vehicles, which is perhaps most pronounced in China, has created a tremendous amount of demand for copper. Last year, 35% of new cars sold in China were EVs. This year, that number is over 50%. In addition to that, 2 years ago, in October 2022, the United States Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which involved $1 trillion, or nearly $1 trillion, in additional infrastructure investment, including $60 billion for electric vehicle recharging stations alone. So this has tended to boost the price of copper. But you're right, copper prices did peak in May. They fell sharply over the summer months before rebounding a little bit in recent weeks. And it seems, I think, that some of that weakness is probably due to the softness of demand in China, as well as the fact that higher interest rates in so many countries around the world, in fact, nearly every country other than China, has slowed down the rate of construction of housing.
미국 국내 원유 생산량이 역사상 지금 최고치를 경신하고 있습니다. 원유 가격에 대한 전망을 여쭙고 싶고요. 그리고 원유 선물 곡선에는 에릭 전무님의 전망이 반영이 되고 있으신지도 좀 궁금합니다.
Yes, so at the moment, the crude oil futures curve is relatively flat. We have crude oil prices trading around $76 per barrel at the moment. You're right, U.S. production has risen to a record high of about 13.2 million barrels per day, which is around 1.5 million barrels per day higher than it was 2 years ago. By contrast, we have significantly lower production on the part of the OPEC plus countries who've reduced their production by a little bit over 3 million barrels per day, which has been supporting the price of oil at sort of a plateau level. We also, of course, have two major conflicts going on in the world, one between Russia and Ukraine, the other between Israel and various proxies of the Iranian government, including the Houthi rebels in Yemen, whose actions have led to a roughly 85% reduction of traffic through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Conflicts have not really stopped the production of oil, but they have caused it to go on very much longer routes around the world. That maybe adds 10 to 12 days to the shipping time. And so all of that has been kind of supporting the price of oil. At the same time, you have weak growth in China, which is the world's major importer of oil. And in addition to the weak growth, you have, as we mentioned, a very strong shift towards electric vehicles in China in particular. In other countries, people are buying more and more hybrid cars, and the average car on the road is using about 2% less fuel each year than the average car was using the year before. So all of this is creating a very strong headwind for oil demand. I think the next key moment for the oil market is likely to be after the U.S. elections, when we have a new administration coming in, and there's a possibility that Saudi Arabia and the other countries in OPEC might decide to begin to increase production. I don't know if they will or not, but this decision could be made when OPEC meets at the end of November or early December. And if they were to raise production, there's a very significant risk to oil prices on the downside.
다양한 원자재에 대한 말씀을 들었고요. 이제는 전체 원자재를 놓고 한번 질문을 드려보고 싶은데요. 먼 미래 얘기보다는 가까운 향후 한 6개월에서 한 1년 정도를 놓고 봤을 때 어떤 원자재가 가장 유망하다고 생각하십니까?
Okay, so the one commodity that I've been very bullish on for a long time is gold, which I would argue in some ways is not really truly a commodity. It's more of a currency. But it's not just me who believes that gold is a currency, it's also the central banks. The central banks treat gold as a currency. The Federal Reserve, for example, is the world's largest holder of gold. And since the year 2008, every single year, the central banks have been net buyers of gold. So what that tells me is that central banks would prefer to hold gold than to hold one another's currencies. And so I think what the central banks are seeing here is three things. First, they're seeing large budget deficits, as we mentioned, but not just in the United States, also large budget deficits in Japan, in China, in many Western European countries, and in the United Kingdom. Secondly, they're seeing a tendency on the part of the United States, which is the holder of the global reserve currency, to impose sanctions on countries like Iran and Russia, which is perhaps causing some central banks to prefer to hold gold rather than dollars. And then third, they're seeing a tendency in recent months towards much lower interest rates, which inherently makes holding government-issued fiat currencies less interesting than holding gold or other hard assets. So I think gold is a very interesting commodity to watch over the next few years.
다음 질문도 역시 사실 원자재 관련된 질문인데요. 이 부분 좀 다른 내용이라서 한국 투자자분들이 가장 궁금해하는 원자재는 아무래도 이 배터리 산업하고 관련된 원자재일 겁니다. 그래서 배터리라든가 에너지 전환 관련된 이 원자재 시장에 대한 이야기를 좀 듣고 싶고요. 또 관련된 이 선물 시장에서 어떤 좀 독특하거나 특이한 점들이 발견되는 게 있다면 좀 같이 말씀을 좀 해주십시오.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of very interesting trends in the futures market related to batteries. So in early 2021, nearly 4 years ago, we launched futures contracts on lithium and cobalt that have begun to grow very, very rapidly in recent years to around 20,000 contracts of open interest in cobalt and over 30,000 contracts of open interest in lithium. What's interesting about this is even as we have seen an explosive growth in demand for electric vehicles in many countries, we have seen a tremendous crash in prices of lithium and cobalt. The market does think that the prices will recover a little bit going forward, but they will remain very low compared to where they were trading, say, in 2022. And so the reason why I think these metals prices are so low at the moment is we have seen explosive growth in supply. Compared to, say, 30 years ago, we have seen a 2,000% increase in the amount of lithium being produced and around a 1,500% increase in the amount of cobalt being produced. So the world is discovering more and more supplies of both metals that's helping to keep a lid on prices despite strong growth in demand. The other thing I would point out about them is that the cost of storing 1 kilowatt hour of electricity in a lithium battery has fallen by about 60% per decade and is down by 98% since the early 1990s. So this technology is becoming abundant and inexpensive, which I think is very promising for continued demand growth in the future.
마지막 질문을 좀 드려보겠습니다. 제가 그 CME 자료들을 보다 보니까 이제 배당금 선물이라고 있더라고요. 이 한국 투자자분들께는 좀 생소한 상품인데요. 이 배당금 선물은 무엇이고 이 투자자들이 배당금 선물의 가격을 어떻게 해석하고 활용하면 좋을지 좀 설명을 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yes, so in early 2015, CME Group launched annual dividend index futures on the S&P 500, which essentially allow people to hedge their exposure to dividends. So the way it's priced is that it's expressed in index points of dividends. So for example, if the S&P is trading at, say, 6,000 points, and the market expects a 2% dividend yield from the index, the expectation would be for there to be 120 index points worth of dividends paid out in a given year. What I find very interesting about dividend index futures as an economist is that it allows us for the first time to peer into the expectations of what investors think is going to happen to corporate profits and dividend payments over the coming decade. It essentially gives us a futures curve or a forward curve of dividends. And what I think is interesting about this at the moment is that it's relatively flat. Investors don't see a great deal of corporate profit growth over the next decade, and yet you have the equity market trading basically at a record high. So this tells me that the equity market is perhaps a little bit expensive at the moment.
제가 준비한 질문은 여기까지인데요. 너무 재미있게 설명을 해주셔서 시간이 금방 이렇게 흘러가는지 몰랐습니다. 우리 에릭 전무님께 질문이 있으신 학생이 있으시면 좀 손을 들어주시면 제가 질문할 수 있도록 기회를 드리겠습니다.
예, 그 수십 년간의 경제 이코노미스트 경험을 가지시고 만약 우리 나이대로 돌아가신다면 어떤 방식으로 투자하실 건지 궁금합니다.
I mean, wow, so I began working when I was 22 years old, which was 28 years ago. I guess if I was able to go back to 1996 and have the knowledge that I have now about how various investments turned out, I could probably turn myself into the world's wealthiest person simply by knowing what was going to happen in the future. I would say, though, that each decade there seems to be a sort of overriding theme. During the first decade of my career in the 1990s, it was mainly equities that were going up. During the second decade, during the 2000s, equities went down and it was mainly commodities that went up. During the third decade in the 20 teens, commodities didn't do very well. but bonds and equities did quite well. And then so far this decade, it's again been mainly equities and also gold that have been going higher. So I guess if you are good at anticipating which sort of investment theme will dominate the next decade, you could become very well off by the time you hit 50 years old like I did a few months ago.
네, 송실대학교 금융경제학과 장윤정 학생입니다. 먼저 저는 한국 코리아 밸류업 지수에 대해서 궁금한데요. 기존 코스피와는 다르게 성장주나 배당 또 자사주 소각이나 PBR, ROE 등을 같이 고려해서 이번에 지수를 산정하게 됐는데 이 지수에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시는지 그리고 이 지수를 편입하는 종목의 기준에서 PBR이나 ROE 말고도 또 추가할 수 있는 기준이 있는지 의견이 궁금합니다.
When I look at Korean stocks, as well as stocks in Japan and stocks in Western Europe, they look to me like they have much lower valuation levels than stocks in the United States. Now, part of the reason for that, though, is the United States stock market is dominated by technology stocks, which are presumed to have very high growth rates. Now, whether or not we will have earnings growth that justifies the valuation of those US stocks is difficult to say. But when I look at Korea's market, I think that there are a lot of bargains here, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Korean market is perhaps a bit undervalued, at least on a relative basis compared to other stock markets.
숭실대학교 금융경제학과 김가은입니다. 조금 전에 하셨던 질문과 사실 비슷한 질문인데요. 현재 한국 시장이 많이 저평가되어 있다고 계속해서 말씀을 하고 계신데 혹시 그렇다면 이걸 올리기 위해서 가장 중요하다고 생각하는 게 무엇인지 해외 시각에서 한번 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
Yeah. Well, that's a difficult question. The truth is that investors around the world have sometimes short attention spans, and I think that investors very often like to pile on to trades that have been doing well. And in the United States stock market, for example, in recent years, there have been 8 stocks that have been doing phenomenally well, and a lot of money is finding its way into these 8 stocks. Presumably, that will not continue forever. And at some point, there will likely be a correction or bear market in the United States that will cause investors to search for other opportunities elsewhere in the world. But exactly what can spark their interest and start a trend is sometimes very, very difficult to say.
긴 시간 오늘 함께 해주셔서 너무 감사드리고요. 딱딱하게 맨날 사무실에서 혹은 교실에서 있다가 색다른 분위기에서 이렇게 에릭 전무님하고 또 학생들하고 같이 이야기를 나누다 보니까 저는 굉장히 뜻깊은 시간이었던 것 같습니다. 대한민국 최고의 금융정보 매체 연합뉴스 경제TV 특집 신동준이 묻고 CME가 답하다는 여기서 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 함께 해주셔서 감사합니다.
Thank you.